About 20 years ago, you wrote an article that argued against the picking of wild mushrooms, primarily for conservation reasons. Is this still something you stand behind? Have your opinions changed on this issue?
Well, I mean, this goes back to my essential hatred of humanity.
This is Dr. Nick Money, mycologist, author of over a dozen books, and the first person to capture a spore being dispersed on video, a process hundreds of million years in the making. He's one of 11 mycologists I interviewed for this video who have fundamentally shaped how we study fungi. Together, their work spans hundreds of years. They've mentored the current generation of mycologists and brought the genomic revolution to fungi. I asked these titans of mycology how they got into the field, advice for amateur and academic mycologists, and a special unique question for them to flex their expertise. I've condensed hours of footage into this one video, showcasing the many paths that lead to the same mycological passion. If you enjoy it, be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps. And if you really enjoy it, you can find a link in the description to the mostly unedited interviews down below. Let's get back to Nick Money. He's a biology professor at the University of Miami, Ohio, where he ran the Western program, UM's individual studies program, for 15 years. Here, he'll elaborate on why he's against picking mushrooms.
I'd far rather that there were beautiful mushrooms and far fewer, if any, human beings. That's some kind of strange empathy that I have with the fungi themselves. Leave them alone. And but on another level, there is growing evidence that areas that are intensively picked, we're seeing changes, a diminution in the populations of fungi in those areas. And though some studies counter that, it's a matter of time. Intensive picking in the same areas again and again. We've got such a limited, appreciation of timescales as individual humans.
His journey to this staunch conservationism required some happenstance, but it was love at first sight. How did you get into mycology? Is it something that you pursued or something you kind of fell into?
I'm a product of, I suppose, a form of affirmative action that I went to a very good university, Bristol University in southern Britain. And one of the first lectures I go to was given by this lovely man, Mike Madeline, who was a mycologist. He passed away a few years ago. And he started talking about the fungi in this intro biology lecture. I guess he did the little chunk on the fungi. And I just found it, I was mesmerized by it and by him. Yeah, it's an exaggeration, it was mind-blowing.
This was surprisingly common. A general interest in biology followed by a single class is often all it took.
A course called fungal genetics. And I said, boy, would I ever like that course.
I needed another botany course, took mycology, and that solidified it.
I had a wonderful professor. His name was Orson Miller, and Orson was just a fantastic instructor, mentor, and mycologist, and I fell in love with the discipline during that.
But one story especially stuck with me.
So I signed up for Intro to Mycology. The professor gets up on the bench in the front of the lab. He says, okay, welcome to what do we know about fungi? We don't know anything. And the 20 plus students in the class were all looking around you. Why the hell are we here? And he says, that's what we're going to find out.
This is Roy Halling, who held a non-traditional academic position as a herbarium curator. He started off his career with a PhD at the University of Massachusetts, Amherst, and ended up in a postdoc position at Harvard's Farlow Herbarium, which, despite the name, had fungi. He transferred his experience and landed a career at the New York Botanical Gardens, starting as an intern, rising over his tenure to the curator of mycology. Over his decades-long stay at NYBG, Roy became one of the world experts on boletes and tropical macrofungi, helping to describe new species and modernize fungal systematics. The NYBG, alongside hosting the Gardens and Museum, also holds the Steer Herbarium, the largest herbarium in the Western Hemisphere with over 8 million specimens. I asked Dr. Halling about his experience in managing the fungal side of this collection and the responsibility that entailed.
It hadn't been really paid attention to and reorganized according to modern mycological science. It was to go there and try to organize and get everything properly organized so that if somebody asks you, hey, do you have a specimen of this? And I wouldn't have to spend 3 hours trying to find the damn thing. I could go, here it is. But the other thing is that type specimens are kept there, and make sure that they were all labeled, so that if somebody was trying to find the type specimen of this species described by William Merle, that you could go and find it and, you know, loan it to them so they could examine it or whatever, for whatever scientific purposes they were doing.
Just a single class can set people onto this lifelong trajectory, but sometimes it just requires a little bit of luck.
I'm one of those casual, accidental mycologists. Most of us don't go into the business. You know, we don't grow up wanting to be a mycologist.
I didn't know that it was fungi I was going to fall in love with, but I did, and I was hooked with fungi.
I was actually planning to study angiosperm systematics. That was my plan. Went nowhere with it. It was before PCR was available, so I am that old. So I just switched. So switched to fungi, and I'm so glad I did. But you know, the bottom line is that I never planned any of this, and the reason I'm a mycologist is because I'm a failed plant botanist. So the power of positive failure.
Then, of course, there were the few that knew they wanted to study fungi when they were younger.
I started collecting mushrooms just for fun, and I got interested in seeing the patterns of feeding of flies in the mushrooms.
I guess probably it started when I was a little child. I was always outside. My mom was always wondering where I was at, and I always come back from, you know, outside playing, and I was usually looking at things in the soil. And
so I got into mycology at an early age because my family is Lithuanian, and so I grew up going out in the forest with my grandmother and my mother and my aunts and my uncles.
Dr. Rytas Vilgalys is a professor in biology at Duke University who studied every fungi you've heard of and then some. His Google Scholar might as well be an encyclopedia. He's trained dozens of mycologists over his career, and even a few in this video. He got into mycology the old-fashioned way, by foraging. From family trips in Lithuania to PhD professor at Duke, Rytas shares his love of fungi by engaging with his local community, from the Triangle Mycological Society to shiitake logs at Duke's campus farm, and of course, forays. I asked an intentionally vague question for the mushroom connoisseur. What fungus has the most potential?
Yeah, what's your favorite mushroom? And I don't have a single favorite anymore because I've kind of done too many things, worked on too many different kinds of fungal projects. So it's hard to say which mushroom is like probably the most influential for humans and awareness. You know, probably Amanita muscaria, hands down. I think more people recognize it without even knowing its name. Yeah, everybody knows about yeasts and so forth, but they don't really know anything about the fungi. But I think, yeah, so certainly mushrooms and like Amanita are the iconic thing that everybody thinks about.
So it's very charming.
It's charming. It's usually friendly. Yeah.
Beyond the origin stories, I wanted to get some actionable instruction for people like me who want to pursue mycology as a career. So I asked, what advice would you give to a high schooler, undergraduate, or early career mycologist looking to pursue mycology as a profession?
There's an absolute critical need for more mycologists, so do it.
The one theme that stood out across all interviews was to get your hands dirty.
Reach out to your local state university mycologist. A lot of us do lab events or forays that can help you start to get involved.
There may not be a fungal lab, but any microbiology, just to get into a lab, just get into the lab.
Take all of the mycology classes you can.
If you're passionate about something, then you absolutely must go for it.
Truly, the best way to get into mycology is to get into mycology, so start now. Building on that one step further, if you want to pursue graduate school or research, getting real experience is key.
I think it's really critical that students get some sort of hands-on laboratory-based experience to sort of complement the knowledge that they gained And then beyond that, then again, sort of presenting their research, doing an independent research project in a lab, not just washing dishes.
As a grad student, if you want to get a job in academia or industry even, you better have some publications, so have a record.
Honestly, somebody doesn't have lab experience, they're really not considered. And so someone like me, they probably wouldn't have wanted because I didn't have the lab experience.
Nancy Keller is the only medical mycologist in this lineup of stars. Her work in the Peace Corps showed her firsthand how fungal pathogens and disease of crops can affect subsistence farming for vulnerable communities. She went on to work with plant pathogens in graduate school, which segued pretty cleanly into her current position as a professor of medical microbiology and immunology, studying a fungal pathogen of humans, Aspergillus. I wanted her opinions on fungal infections as a global threat, particularly in a post-pandemic world.
We hear from the news or, about these fungal pathogens and how their incidence is increasing. Do you think it's maybe overblown or it's maybe accurately represented? Or I guess what's your opinion?
I don't think it's overblown. I think it's accurate. And the problem, a lot has to do with antifungal resistance. So, there's two contributors. We can keep people alive now that 50 years ago we couldn't, right? You probably even self-know. You don't know, I mean, anyone who has a transplant or autoimmune or this or that, they can use drugs now to keep themselves going, but those drugs lower their immune system. So we have a whole series of folks that are just, honestly, right, petri dishes in some ways.
Yeah.
And so we just didn't have that before.
Yeah, that's true.
So there's that, and that's really added to it. But I think this antifungal resistance is a huge thing.
Yeah.
The growing challenge of fungal infections is a high-stakes issue, and understanding these threats requires the sort of collaboration fostered at meetings like the Mycological Society of America's annual meeting, where the majority of these interviews were conducted. Naturally, when asking for advice at an academic meeting,
well, certainly attending a meeting like we're at, the Mycological Society of America meeting, just to see all the plethora of different types of research that are being done, to explore that and all the opportunities to communicate with other people, to network. And then if one, as I was, also interested in the plant pathology side, other societies, like the American Phytopathological Society.
There's an array of academic societies which can help you learn about your respective fields and explore new opportunities. But I think these meetings are particularly important for mycology because it lies at the intersection of many sciences.
There's not one thing that is a mycologist, right? I mean,
even if you can't take a mycology class or work in a mycology lab, it's still essential to learn how to do good science.
I mean, the most important part of this is to become educated, as a fully rounded scientist, taking some chemistry and physics.
You're always going to learn new things and go into new areas because you always have to, do that. You can't stay stagnant.
So as you're developing as a mycologist, stay broad. Learn your chemistry, learn your statistics, learn your ecology if that's your interest. Because really, most of the academic positions in mycology have always been sort of between fields.
And after you've built that baseline, you should continue to be creative with your framing and keep an open mind to alternatives that don't seem fungally related at first.
So I've had students that different types of programs like USDA or USAID. Some students decided they wanted to do some sort of industry-related career, right? So there's a lot of nonprofits. So we have like the Triangle Land Conservancy here. They're called NGOs, non-government organizations.
There's a field of fermentation microbiology where a lot of the fermentation microbiologists are actually mycologists, or in ecology departments. Many ecology departments are filled with people who work with fungi.
I got a friend too with a background in mycology that went to law school.
I mean, collections are a great way. Most of us are involved in either herbaria or fungaria, either curation, direction, collections management.
Dr. Cathy Aime, a professor of botany and plant pathology at Purdue, studying plant pathogens, tropical fungi, and plant pathogens that are also tropical fungi. She's also the director of the Purdue Herbaria, plural, the Cerebral Plant and Arthur Fungal. For a sizable portion of her career, she worked for the USDA, doing much of what she does now. so I had to ask her about which path one should choose.
You know, the world's upside down right now, so anything I say in this arena deals with before January of this year. There would have been pros and cons to either job. So working for the government used to be, the pros would be you don't have to worry about securing outside funding, right? You're funded, you have a very well-equipped lab, you usually have technical support. The downside would be that, of course, you're doing science for the government, so there are directed areas in which you can work. In academia, presuming once you get tenure, of course, you have the academic freedom to pursue any line of research you want, but the burden is on you to support that research. Yeah, it's just impossible to predict now. It's not a very good scenario in either place right now.
This sentiment was echoed by others.
It's obviously become, as I'm sure you're aware, increasingly difficult to obtain a university position. They're still there, but there are far fewer of them.
The federal funding situation is terrible, and this incredible partnership between the federal government and academia that has yielded so many advances in basic research is really strained.
Politics are getting in the way of science funding, while the academic positions are becoming scarcer, more competitive, and have less funding. So be prepared for an uphill battle if you want to pursue academic mycology, if you're American. But not everyone is trying to become a mycologist, so I had to ask a surprisingly different question. What advice would you give to someone looking to pursue mycology not as a job, but as a hobby?
Now, that's a completely different situation, because if you're not looking at it as a means of making a livelihood, and it's just something you want to tap into and be involved and be active, then you're in a really good position right now, because we have so many clubs, so many organizations.
So while the professional paths narrow, the amateur side has never been so inviting. We are in a golden age for community mycology, groups of people dedicated to fungi as art, food, and as a fascination. It all comes down to community. And if there's one person that knows community mycology, it's Dr. David Hibbett. Dave started his fungal pursuit in the then new Vilgalys lab. Hibbett was his first grad student, in fact. He's currently professor of biology at Clark University, studying ecology and evolution through systematics. He helped establish modern fungal taxonomy through DNA barcoding. Dave's impact is huge. In fact, I have a myth I need to bust real quick. I've heard from actually a few people that you've coined the term oid.
Oid?
Like agaricoid or pleurotoid. Is that true?
Are you kidding me? No.
That's what I heard. I mean, even Rytas said it.
I don't know. It's a kind of cool myth. I mean, we could probably yes, absolutely. That was me. Pleurotoid, agaricoid, polyporoid.
While the story may be false, the fact that this is even slightly believable speaks to Dave's influence. Beyond his research, he's helped to create a vibrant community of mycology at Clark, working closely with local mycology groups. He has a passion to make mycology accessible to everyone. Speaking of spreading mycology to everyone, ignore the costume change, I wanted to give a thanks to an amateur group which made this video possible, the Boston Mycological Club. Most of the interviews here were at the MSA Annual Meeting, which costs money to go to. I told them I wanted to film the whole thing. I wanted to interview people and document the experience, and they were generous enough to fund the trip, which made these videos possible. So thank you so much to the Boston Mycological Club. If you're in the Boston area or in the greater Northeast as a whole, I could not recommend them enough. You might even run into David onto one of the forays, but enough about me. Back to the other Clancy. How do you create a community of mycology in your local area?
Well, you don't do it all by yourself, that's for sure. I'm teaching mycology this fall, and the class is capped at 12. And so when you have small classes like that, and you have students that are doing research in your lab, that just sort of contributes to that sense of community. We have an undergraduate mycology club here at Clark, which includes people who are not science majors, lots of like art, psychology, geography, whatever. And then we connect to the local amateur mycology scene, so the Boston Mycological Club, the Pioneer Valley Mycological Association. All of that contributes to that community. And for me, that's really incredibly rewarding. I mean, I love I love doing science, I love writing papers and all that stuff, but having a community of humans to interact with is incredibly satisfying.
The main sentiment from professionals was to look to amateur mycologists who have experience explicitly outside of the lab. There is immense respect for many of those who would fall under the term amateur mycologist.
The term amateur mycologist is really a misnomer, because a lot of the people that are in these groups are really well versed on the taxonomy of fungi.
I think the term amateur is a little, that's a little loaded. I mean, a lot of the so-called amateur mycologists out there are just like superb taxonomists, like way better than me and better than I ever will be.
Some of the best mushroom people are not academics per se, but they are academically gifted people who study mushrooms.
Going out and finding a local group that holds these amateurs was one of the biggest pieces of advice.
Well, there are mushroom clubs too.
There's all kinds of citizen science groups in almost every town.
I often like to point out that one of the great things about mycology that it shares only with a few other sciences is that it's a field where amateurs have always made a lot of contribution. And the other two fields are astronomy and ornithology. There are a lot of bird watchers, there are a lot of sky watchers, well, there are a lot of fungus collectors.
Local mushroom clubs are a really great way to go on forays. The North American Mycological Association, another good organization to get to know.
Dr. Van Cotter was one of the first mycologists I met, ever, at a foray a couple years back, and he's the only industry mycologist who I spoke to for this video. After a PhD in botany with a focus on mycology, he worked in the private sector on chemicals to kill fungal pathogens and nematodes. After semi-retiring, he continued working with Rytas Vilgalys and Marc Cubeta at Duke and NC State, in herbaria, the lab, and as a teacher. His vast experience has been corroborated by many of those who I spoke to, which culminated in a sort of urban legend that Van could smell an incubator and not only determine if there was contamination, but the genus that contaminant was from. So of course, I had to check if it was true.
Well, yes, to a degree. In fact, one thing that was kind of neat, we were harvesting an extramycorrhizal experiment at Duke, so artificially inoculating pines and then taking it apart to determine the level of mycorrhization on the roots. And so in parallel to actually doing the quantitative, I would sniff them prior to and rate them, and the correlation was excellent.
There you go. Did you put that in the paper? Or was
Well, we didn't, but it was a fun thing to do. Yeah, the nose is really useful, and of course, just from an edibility standpoint, become involved in working in workshops as far as training people to become certified to commercially collect wild mushrooms and sell them. And that's certainly one of the things we teach there, is use your nose as one of the criteria to make sure the quality is what it should be.
Cotter's volunteer work and training of commercial foragers are just a few examples of how you can contribute to mycology without a formal degree.
Find mushroom ecologists and email them, even if they live in another state or another country, and say, I'm really interested. Can I contribute to your research by identifying things?
Get involved in doing bio-blitzes, the fundus, rare fungal challenges, all that sort of thing.
But he asked me one day, about my background, and I knew where my advisor had gone to school, but we didn't know anything beyond that. So that was what started us with the genealogy. And so we worked on that.
Dr. Meredith Blackwell is an expert at finding creative ways to contribute to the field. She's a fantastic researcher who worked on entomopathogens as well as fungal DNA barcoding during her professorship at LSU. But she's a dual threat. Her non-academic contributions to mycology are just as notable. Firstly, the genealogy of mycologists, MycoTree. It's a site that shows which mycologists studied where and with who, providing a sort of family tree of those relationships. She had a one-off project, a bounty campaign for a rare fungus, Lobosporangia transversale, a desert zygomycete unseen since the 1960s. And finally, the Oral History of Mycology, a YouTube series where she interviews many mycologists, which inspired this video and really this whole channel. Dr. Blackwell has an array of fantastic projects which I greatly admire, all of which don't necessarily require an academic degree to pursue. So I asked her about them.
Well, the genealogy I started 40 years ago with Bob Gilbertson, who was at the University of Arizona. And he was really a history nut, loved Shakespeare. He would write on Ganodermus. He would write little quotations from Shakespeare poetry. But he was great fun. So New Win is now collaborating on it. That's great. So that's been a big hobby for a number of years. The interviews with mycologists came about because I saw an interview at the Botanical Congress in St. Louis a number of years ago. And it was actually a demonstration to show you how to do an interview for history of, at that point, botany. So I was interested in it with Bob, with several different people, and we started doing it at the the Mycological Congress in San Juan, Puerto Rico a few years ago.
Check out that video series to see more of Dr. Blackwell. It's a great example that you don't really need a PhD to contribute to these alternative projects. All that's needed is some passion and effort. There are a few more mycologists I want to highlight, each with a story or perspective that stands on its own. Joan Bennett started her career at Tulane University, studying how Aspergillus creates mycotoxins, as it's a major cause of grain spoilage. In a career pivot to the more genetic side, her hometown of New Orleans was hit by Hurricane Katrina, completely uprooting her life. In a truly fantastic article, The Fungi That Ate My House, she details this career pivot and how she had to deal with sick building syndrome, a syndrome caused by many of the fungi which she herself studied. Moving from aflatoxins to volatiles, her current work studies the secondary metabolism and how molds affect humans in the built environment, at her current position at Rutgers University, though she's currently moving back to her hometown to take a professorship at Tulane. Throughout this, she's been a huge advocate for women in science, particularly in her home domain of microbiology. She established the Women's Center at Newcomb College and the Office for the Promotion of Women in STEM at Rutgers, as well as chair for the National Academy's Committee on Women in Science. Mycology, in my view, is particularly inclusive, but I wanted her opinion as a figure for women in STEM.
Well, a lot of my life, when I was working on equity in science, I have to admit that the focus was on gender. I'm happy to say we've pretty much won that battle. That there are lots of women now not only attending meetings but in positions of authority, and we've had a whole series of female presidents of Mycological Society. But going forward, the diversity that I'm mostly concerned about is just frankly racial diversity. This is a very white meeting. There aren't even that many Asian people here. And I personally plan when I get back settled in New Orleans to try to work closely with a historically black university in New Orleans called Xavier. And I'd like to see us do some outreach programs to the HBCUs in the country, because there have always been some African American mycologists, but not as many as there should be.
Joan reflects broader efforts across mycology to make the field more inclusive and accessible. The MSA has recently elevated the DEI chapter into a DEI section, but as she mentioned, there's always more that we can do. Next up is Dr. Marc Cubeta at NC State University, specializing in plant pathogens, particularly Rhizoctonia, but has more than ample experience in dozens of other pathogenic fungi, which he's worked on throughout his career. He's also a mushroom expert through his experience as the former curator of NC State's fungal herbarium. He's also the scariest mycologist because, fun fact, he is a black belt level martial artist. He was around at the beginning of NC State's Center for Integrated Fungal Research, CIFER, and is currently on the executive board, overseeing more than a dozen scientists who all work with fungi in one shape or form. So I asked him about the history of this organization, as well as how organizations like this impact the broader research sphere.
So the idea was to try to bring people together that have different expertise in fungi. So the original group was Ralph Dean, there was Gary Payne, who worked on aflatoxin, and Margot Daub, who worked on, again, fungal toxins and Cercospora. So it was really, those three were the nucleus for the center. Then along came me and Ignacio Carbone. So they invited us to join the center because we brought different expertise, you know, that complemented their expertise. The center, I believe, now has 19 members, right? And so you have people like Christine Hawks, right? So she does a lot of work on fungal ecology. You have Nick Buchler, who's over in the vet school. He does a lot of work on chytrids. So we have this sort of core group of people now where we try to interact with each other across different colleges, across different departments on fungal-related projects, right? And a lot of that also involves the training of graduate students as well as postdoctoral scientists and also undergraduate students. So that's sort of the vision of the center.
Cypher and other groups like Cypher exemplify the best parts of science, the interdisciplinary nature of all research that is required to tackle big problems. And it's a framework that many universities are starting to adopt. Last but certainly not least, Dr. Tom Bruns. Tom was one of the pioneers of the genetic revolution in mycology. Before genetics, identification was mainly morphological, which was pretty inaccurate. Plus, for things in culture, identification on fungi, which are just in culture, look pretty dang similar. You know, what's this mycelium versus that one? So identification of fruiting bodies was iffy, and assuming you got it in culture, if you could even culture it, it was difficult to tell if it was the same thing that someone else had, or God forbid if there's contamination. Tom Bruns and his colleagues came in and helped clear this up by establishing the ITS sequence, a DNA barcode that could be used for identification of all fungi. As one of the progenitors of fungal bioinformatics, I asked him about how the field has changed since its inception.
Well, I think you hit it on the head there that you know, the techniques we use now are just so much more streamlined and kind of off-the-shelf techniques to use, where at the time it was much more difficult, and the resolution of the data just sucked. You know, I look back at the trees I made out of restriction enzyme mapping, and they were primitive, man. Technology really has driven biology now for quite a while. As technology changes, it all of a sudden opens up all these classic questions that people always had but didn't have a way to address. So a lot of the developments oftentimes were there and then get adopted into our field. So the biggest change was technology, and staying with that technology was important too.
So there's the summary of 11 mycologists. Hundreds of years of experience, and one overarching message. If you're interested in fungi, there is a place for you in mycology. No need for a degree, no need to buy hundreds of dollars of books or equipment. Just show up and learn. The barrier for entry has never been lower, and the fungi, well, they've been around for over 1 billion years. They can wait a little longer for you. But maybe don't pick them if you want to avoid the wrath of Nick Money. Check out the description for the copy of the mostly unedited interviews. There was a lot of really great stuff which I had to cut for brevity. If you liked the video, subscribe. If you subscribe, be sure to like. I'll see you in the next one. But in the meantime, be sure to mind your mycelium.